This is the Agoro Carbon Farming Podcast. Agoro Carbon Alliance is taking action on a global scale to reverse the effects of climate change by decarbonizing farming and restoring carbon to the world's soil. On this podcast, we're going to explore carbon farming from the soil to the atmosphere and how it affects everyone in between. To learn more, visit us at agorocarbonalliance.com. Welcome to another edition of the Carbon Farming Podcast. Today, we're diving into the fascinating intersection of agriculture and technology, exploring how it can boost not just the quality of your produce, but also our environmental contributions. Joining us to help us understand this better is Tommy Pudil from Agoro Carbon Science team. Born in Iowa with a deep-rooted passion for farming, Tommy has harnessed advanced techniques like remote sensing and AI from his time at Creighton University and Georgia Southern University to study the health of vegetation and map land cover. Today, he'll be discussing the pivotal role of soil stratification in creating high-quality agricultural carbon credits. Tommy, let's dive into it first. What is soil stratification and what does it mean? What does it truly mean?
Sure. So soil stratification is the process that we take to divide a farm or ranch of one of our growers into different strata. And strata are areas that represent similar soil organic carbon. So say you have a farm and you have some fields of corn and you have some pasture fields. Mm-hmm. Now, you might guess right off the bat that the soil carbon in the pasture is going to be different from the soil carbon in the cornfields. So instead of having 5 separate cornfields we would have to sample within, and 5 separate pasture fields we'd have to sample within, our strata might group those into 2 different groups. So a group of cornfields could be in the same strata, and a group of pasture could be in the same strata. Now say you also have soybeans. Maybe they have similar soil carbon values to the corn. So we still could have 2 strata and group your soybeans and your corn into one group and your pasture into one group. So it's not necessarily the land cover, but the soil carbon that we're grouping into these different strata.
And why is that important when we're trying to measure the soil carbon?
So for a couple different reasons. The first is efficiency of soil sampling. So we could go out there and we could sample 1,000 times in a 5-acre field. But do we need to? Is that really efficient to the farmer to have people in their field all day? Is it efficient to pay for all those samples or for the soil samplers to be in one field for such a long time? Now, we want to accurately represent the soil carbon across the entire farm, but we want to do that while being cost efficient and maintaining accuracy. So the stratification process allows us to sample enough, but not oversample, and to still accurately represent the carbon across the entire farm.
So efficiency is the key word here. We're not going out and doing work just to do work, but we're still maintaining the credibility or the accuracy of the data of the sample that we're taking.
That's right. So we want to, take into account as much information as we can to make sure we're accurately representing. In my example, pasture, corn, soybeans, that seems pretty clear cut, but that's not always the case. There's a lot of things that can influence the amount of carbon in the soil. So sure, land cover, but other things such as precipitation, elevation or slope of the ground, other weather data, soil type, things like that all play into our stratification process to help make sure that we're being as efficient as possible and accurately representing the soil.
And we know from our agronomy classes that soils are very different. So how does that play into this whole thing? I mean, can you have accurate numbers with different fields with the same or similar crops and not taking as many soil samples? Does that cause an issue?
Sure. So that's one thing we take into account too is soil type. And kind of with the same example as the land cover. Just because there's a different land cover doesn't necessarily mean the carbon's going to be different. Just because there's a different soil type, or just because there's 40 different soil types, doesn't necessarily mean that the carbon's going to be different. Sure, it does play a role, and with our stratification method, That's one of the benefits, is that with that technology, it can take into account the different soil types and tell us where we should focus at more with our soil samples, or create a different strata to make sure that there are some points that are going to be, representative of the different soil. But it doesn't always mean that we're going to, just because one factor changes, it doesn't always mean that we're going to need a bunch of samples to represent that area.
Okay, okay. What is this Agoro Carbon's MRV process? What does MRV stand for, and what does that mean?
Sure. So MRV stands for monitoring, reporting, and verification. And in our MRV process, there's a few things that play in. So we monitor the amount of carbon in the soil from the beginning of the process all the way through the 10 years of the contract. And we monitor, the carbon at the beginning, at year 5 and year 10, how it changes. We monitor the practices going on, the things that are planted in each field, and then we report those things to a third party. And what they do is they look at the soil carbon values of what we say what was sequestered, what we measured in the soil, the practices that were done, and then they will verify our process. They will say, okay, based on the numbers of soil carbon that you say was sequestered, based on the processes that were done, we will verify that, yes, you're correct, this much carbon was sequestered. And then they issue us the actual carbon credits, which is what holds the monetary value. So there's different groups at Agoro that play into the MRV process. Some of those are us and the soil sampling design group. There's a carbon baseline modeling that's done to represent the soil if nothing were to change. And then there's our grower success team, which collects a lot of data from the growers, boundaries, historical practices, things like that. Soil sampling and stratification, it plays an important part specifically because if we do our job incorrectly, it could influence the outcome of the entire project. Say we don't accurately represent the soil carbon, and this verification body comes back and says, your numbers aren't quite adding up. We're not able to issue you all the carbon credits that we thought you were going to. And additionally, if we don't accurately represent the carbon in the soil, they might say, well, it doesn't look like you sequestered as much carbon as you thought, so we're not able to issue you all of those carbon credits either. So to do justice to our growers and to ourselves, we need to make sure that we're accurately stratifying the soil and representing the carbon that was sequestered as accurately as we can with our soil sampling points.
Well, it sounds like there has been some science involved in this whole process. If I'm a rancher or a grower is listening to this, who has to do all this work? Who's going out and taking all these samples and sending them in and getting them monitored and reported properly?
Sure. So here on the sampling design team, we work with stratifying the soil, plotting the sampling points, and then we send those to our third-party vendors that actually are the ones that go to your farm, collect the soil samples, and send them to the labs. And those labs measure the carbon that was in the soil with their combustion methods, and they send the data back to us. And with all of that stuff, finally we have all the data at the end of the process. Then we send it into the verification bodies.
Sounds like there's a lot of good checks and balances so that accuracy is maintained or achieved, right?
Right. There's a lot of people with their eyes on this process. It's very important that we get it right.
Is this process that Agoro Carbon uses, is it any different than the other companies that are in the ag carbon market?
Sure. So there's a couple ways that Agoro's process is a little bit better than our competitors. We use some high resolution imagery for when we do the stratification. So there's a lot of different methods of conducting a stratification, creating the map, and ways you can do that. But with our high resolution imagery, we're able to see a lot of detail on the ground. And even though I said that within a field, soil carbon might not vary too much, this allows us to see a lot of details, like right up to the fence or right up to the property boundary, alongside roads, alongside areas of trees, small ponds that we have to exclude because you're not going to sequester any carbon underwater, things like that. So that's one way that we're able to set ourselves apart. Another thing is, because of our advanced soil sampling design process, we're actually able to save money on soil sampling. So you pay by the individual sample, and if we were to take a bunch of samples with a less advanced process, we would end up paying a lot more to get those samples processed. But since we have an advanced design, we know we can accurately represent it and keep the number of samples down a little bit. We can save some money that way as a company.
You mentioned that you're using satellite imagery to identify some of the stratification. Are there other sources or other remote sensing that you do to go into the modeling to come up with these stratification models?
Sure. So remote sensing is the process of observing or studying something without coming into direct contact with it. So there's a lot of satellites that are up in space and they're taking pictures of the Earth. So if you open Google Maps on your phone or Google Earth on your computer and you see the images, that's what it is. It's satellites taking those pictures. Now, the satellites that are up in space aren't just taking any pictures, they're taking it, measuring colors that we can see, but they also measure things like infrared or thermal radiation that we can't see with our eyes. And with data like that, like infrared, for example, we're able to easily see bodies of water or distinguish between different kinds of plants, which can help us a lot with our modeling approaches. Also, there's high resolution aerial imagery. So aerial photographs that are taken, just from a plane. The USDA established the National Agriculture Imagery Program in the early 2000s. And what they do is they fly a plane over the entire United States every other year, and they take high resolution aerial photographs, basically. With that, we're able to use, that high resolution data to see a lot of detail, along with the satellite data, which is more frequent, every 5 days or so, to see how things change in the field. We can't be out at every farm all the time, but if we can see, okay, this field was harvested 3 times in the summer, we can make some inferences about what's going on the ground and apply that to our modeling approach without having to be everywhere all at once.
Yeah, it's crazy how much information we can get from a satellite image and even these aerial imagery. And I assume, so the stratification process that Agoro Carbon is using is mainly to help with efficiencies and accuracies on getting the soil samples, identifying where we need to take the samples and how many we need to take. Are there any other things that you're learning from this soil stratification method? Are you trying to answer any other kind of questions?
Sure. So really, one thing we're always trying to do with soil stratification is make sure we're accurately representing the soil carbon on the ground. So we can stratify it, and it's good to have less samples for all parties involved as long as that accuracy is high. If we lose that accuracy, then we lose everything else. So we're looking at, the factors that most influence soil carbon. Is it precipitation? Is it land cover? Maybe temperature could have a bigger impact than we thought. And how can we factor those things into the stratification process? Another thing is how can we represent those factors in the stratification process with things like remote sensing data? Is there, a weather station nearby that can give us the temperature? If not, how are we going to get that data? Things like elevation that get measured from, a radar type sensor on an aircraft or satellite. Can we get data like that for the place we're looking at? Finding those data sources to incorporate different factors that influence soil carbon into our models is what we need to do to keep maintaining that high accuracy. So that's something we're looking at with soil stratification always. Also, how can we speed up the process of the stratification? So it's really computer intensive to look at so many acres across the entire United States. It takes a lot of computer power. How can we, speed up the process, make sure we don't fall behind on delivering the soil sampling points to our samplers so they can get out there and sample at specific times of year? So we're employing things like computer automation on some steps rather than going and downloading data on my own. We can have the computer automatically download some data that we need. Also, we can use things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to speed up things like the land cover classification to make it more accurate right away. Normally, that would take a long time to go through and map what the different things on the ground are. But if we can use AI to speed up this process, keep a high accuracy, then we can add that into some of our steps to help us out.
Interesting. As I'm listening to this, I'm trying to put my my boots on and think about myself as a grower or a rancher, and why does this matter? And I think I've come up with some reasons why, and I want to run those by you and see if I'm missing anything. One is reliability and accuracy. If I've signed on with Agoro Carbon Alliance, and I'm actually implementing some of the changes that you have recommended so I can capture more carbon, I want to make sure that I'm getting paid for that. So the reliability and the accuracy of the sampling and the measuring, the reporting, the verification process, and all these checks and balances is as highly reliable and accurate as possible. And it sounds like Agoro's thought through this quite well. The other thing is that I'm thinking about is I don't have to go out and do it myself. I don't have to have a team of people with soil probes going out and doing sampling for a week, and just poking holes all over my land and leaving fences down and letting the cows get out. So, am I missing anything here, Tommy?
Sure. No, that sounds about right. That's one of the great things about Agoro in the community we have there. There's been a lot of eyes on this process.
Uh-huh.
If someone's working on a change, it's not just, here's a change, let's apply it. Everyone's looking to make sure that this change, it's actually going to work. It's not going to compromise the accuracy or the integrity of our project to implement some changes. We are able to see a lot of detail and accurately put sample points where we need to, so our soil samplers can get out there, they can get the job done, they can get it done quick, and they can get it done in a way that's accurately going to measure your soil without being out there for months on end to get a million samples.
There's a lot of information that you may need to make a decision to whether you want to use Agoro Carbon Alliance or not. There's a knowledge hub at agorocarbon.com that you can go to that has a lot of information, including these podcast episodes. Where else would you suggest they look, Tommy, to understand more about soil stratification and how that all works with this whole Agoro Carbon Alliance process?
So I'm actually writing an article right now that's going to be on the Knowledge Hub. It's going to talk a little bit more about the stratification process, the different things that go in, and how we use different tools. And it should be here on the Knowledge Hub, I'd say, before the end of the month. So not too long into the future, we'll have some more information out there about the process, about what we're doing with soil stratification.
Tommy, it sounds like this is a lot of fun. I can sense in your body language that no one else sees because this is an audio podcast, but I can see that you're excited about it. That it seems like a lot of fun for you, and it seems like Agoro Carbon Alliance has put a lot of thought, a lot of science behind this. And again, it all comes back to accuracy and reliability in reporting and verifying, so that the farmer and rancher can maximize their carbon capture on farm. So thank you very much. Anything else that we didn't cover that you think our audience should know about?
I think a lot of this stuff might seem scary. A lot of the technology side, and are they going to do a good job? It's hard to believe, and I understand the skepticism, but I just have to say that you got to take a leap. And on the inside, I can tell you there's a lot of people looking at these processes, making sure that we're doing the best job we can for you. And you just got to take the leap and give it a try.
And you can also talk to somebody live. If you go to agorocarbon.com, you can touch bases with an actual person and have a conversation with them, and maybe even have them out to your farm or ranch and have them walk around with you and tell you. And they're really, really knowledgeable agronomists that can help you understand this whole process. I think that hands-on personal approach means a lot out there, especially in today's time. So thank you very much, Tommy, letting us learn a little bit more about the soil stratification process and why it matters.
Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate it. I'll second that. There's a lot of people more than happy to help, to come out and talk to you and see what's going on where you're at.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Agoro Carbon Farming Podcast, where we bring you knowledge on how to sustainably and profitably transform farming through carbon cropping. To learn more about how you can become a partner, visit us at agorocarbonalliance.com or follow us on our many social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn.